I raised my son with love, but lately he's moved through this house like a stranger. Then I found a box under his bed, filled with words and drawings that showed how deeply he hated me. And when I saw my wife's name tied to his plans, I felt my family shatter in one heartbeat. Before we continue, if you love these stories, please subscribe to our channel, because that is our motivation to make better stories each day for you. And now let us know where you are listening in the comment. People say you know your own blood better than anyone. That's a lie. I thought I knew my son. Thought I knew the way his mind worked, the rhythm of his moods, the small habits that made him mine. But lately, he's been moving through this house like a stranger. His steps are quieter, like he's tiptoeing past me. His eyes won't stay on mine. And his room, his goddamn room, has become a vault sealed with slammed doors and excuses. I first noticed something was off on a Tuesday night. I had come home late from work, exhausted, and all I wanted was silence, maybe a whiskey. But as I walked past his door, I caught it. Movement, too quick, too nervous. The shuffle of fabric, a muttered curse under his breath, and the thud of wood against carpet. I paused. The door was cracked just enough for me to see his back hunched low near the bed. He shoved something underneath, his shoulders tight with urgency, then sat up straight as if nothing happened. By the time I opened the door, he was sprawled out across the mattress, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. "Everything okay in here?" I asked. He looked at me quick and sharp. That was the moment, not his words. "Yeah, Dad, just homework." No, it was the eyes. They darted, calculating before he forced them steady. That split second was enough. My son was hiding something, and I swear to God my heart knew it wasn't something small. At dinner, he barely spoke, poked at his food like it was punishment. His mother covered for him, of course. "He's just tired," she said. Always the mediator, the excuse maker. I let it go, at least out loud. But my mind wouldn't stop circling back to that sound, the scrape of something being shoved under his bed. That night, I lay awake beside my wife, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house felt amplified. At 2 a.m., I heard it again. A door hinge groaning, soft steps across carpet. My son moving like a thief in his own home. I got up, careful not to wake her, and stepped into the hallway. His door was shut. A thin line of light leaked from underneath, flickering. I stood there longer than I should have, listening, whispering. His voice low, urgent, like he was talking to someone. But when I leaned closer, there was no reply. Just him talking to himself, or so I thought. If you're still listening, please subscribe and leave us a sweet comment. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. Over coffee, I studied him at the table. He avoided me, eyes glued to his cereal. My wife chatted on about groceries and bills, but her voice was far away. My attention was on the boy sitting across from me. The boy I raised. The boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms shook the house. Now he sat rigid, jaw tight, spoon clinking against the bowl. And when I asked him about school, he muttered one-word answers. "You okay?" I pressed. "Fine. Fine doesn't sound fine." He looked up, then really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something raw flash across his face. Fear, maybe, or guilt, but just as quick it was gone. He stood, dumped his half-eaten cereal in the sink, and left without another word. My wife sighed as if I were the problem. "He's a teenager. They go through things. You remember being his age, don't you?" "The truth, I don't. My father was strict, brutal even. Secrets in his house weren't tolerated. They were beaten out of you. And maybe I swore I'd never be like him. But the weight of suspicion sat on me all the same. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. That evening, when the house was quiet, and my son hadn't returned yet, I went into his room. It smelled different, like sweat, metal, and something faintly chemical. Not the usual stench of dirty laundry or teenage cologne. I shut the door behind me and crouched down beside the bed. Dust gathered in clumps. But near the far corner, the carpet was disturbed, flattened in a way that told me something had been shoved there recently. My hand slid under the frame. Cold metal grazed my fingers. I froze, pulse pounding. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it out. A box, old, dented, but locked. I turned it over in my hands, listening to the faint rattle inside. My palms grew slick. Whatever was in here, he wanted it hidden bad enough to risk me finding it. That was when the front door slammed. I shoved the box back under the bed, scrambled to my feet, and tried to look casual as his footsteps pounded up the stairs. The knob twisted. He stopped short when he saw me standing there. "What are you doing in my room?" His voice cracked, but not with fear, with anger. I smiled tight and practiced. "Just checking in." "On what?" "On you." He glared at me, chest heaving, fists clenching at his sides. For a moment, it wasn't like looking at my son. It was like looking at someone who hated me. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. But as I walked down the hall, one thought burned through me. Whatever was in that box under his bed, it wasn't just a secret. It was a betrayal, and I was going to find out. The thing about suspicion is once it grabs hold of you, It never lets go. You try to ignore it, to bury it under routine, work, dinners, bills, but it keeps clawing at the back of your mind, whispering, "Look closer, look again." That box under my son's bed haunted me. I could still feel its cold weight in my hands, hear the faint rattle when I tilted it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there with my wife's back turned toward me, wondering if she felt the same distance I did. But she breathed steady and soft, like nothing in the world was wrong. By morning, I'd made up my mind. When the boy left for school, I followed my wife to the car. She kissed me goodbye like always, quick, distracted, the kind of kiss you give out of habit, not love. Then she drove off to work, leaving the house mine. Finally, I went straight upstairs into his room and shut the door. The box was still there, wedged deep in the far corner. My pulse thundered as I dragged it out again. I turned it over in my lap, searching. The lock wasn't much, cheap, rusted, easy to break. Still, I hesitated. It felt like crossing a line. But then I remembered his glare the night before. The way his fists had clenched like he wanted to hit me, my own son. I grabbed a screwdriver from the garage and popped the lock. The lid creaked open. Inside was chaos. Receipts stuffed into envelopes, crumpled notes, some scribbled in handwriting that didn't look like his. And at the bottom, a leather-bound notebook, its cover scratched with something sharp, like a knife had carved into it. I picked it up. My hands trembled. The first page was filled with words written in jagged, angry strokes. "He doesn't deserve anything. I hate him. She says he'll pay." My throat tightened. I flipped through more pages. Drawings, violent ones, knives, flames. A figure that looked too much like me, crossed out with heavy black ink. And then messages, not to himself, but written as if responding to someone. "I did what you said. He didn't notice. When do we make the move?" I stared at those words until the letters blurred. My hands were ice. My mind refused to process it. But the meaning was clear enough. He wasn't just hiding secrets, he was conspiring. And whoever she was, he was talking about my wife. I shoved everything back into the box. Heart hammering, mind reeling. I needed proof, more than just scribbles and whispers. As I slid the box back under the bed, I caught something else wedged between the floorboards. A folded slip of paper. I pulled it free, smoothing it flat. A receipt from a pharmacy across town. My wife's name was on it. The purchase, sleeping pills, large quantity. My stomach twisted. That evening I couldn't look at them the same. My son sitting across from me at the table, eyes downcast, shoving food around his plate. My wife making small talk, smiling too easily, glancing at him like they shared some unspoken joke. When she reached out to refill my glass of wine, I caught myself staring at the liquid, wondering if I should drink it at all. The house suddenly felt hostile. Not a home, just a place where two people I trusted most were hiding knives behind their backs, waiting for the right moment to strike. And so I made a decision. If they wanted to play games with me, I'd play better. I would keep quiet. I would pretend I knew nothing. But while they plotted in shadows, I would start plotting in the light. Because if betrayal was what they wanted, then revenge would be what they got. The night I found that receipt, I didn't sleep a single minute. Every creak of the house sounded like a threat. Every breath from my wife beside me felt like poison in the air. They thought they were clever, whispering behind closed doors, hiding notes under a bed. But they forgot one thing. No one knows this house better than I do. And by the time I was done watching them, they wouldn't just regret betraying me, they'd beg me for mercy. At dawn, I got up before the alarm. My wife stirred, her hand brushing the sheets where I'd been, but she didn't wake. I stood over her for a moment, studying her face. Peaceful, innocent, exactly how she wanted to look. But I knew better. I'd seen her name on that receipt. She wasn't innocent. She was careful. I went downstairs, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper open, pretending to read. But my mind wasn't on the headlines. It was on the shadows between the lines, the whispers I'd overheard, the journal under my son's bed. When my wife came down, she was dressed sharp, hair perfect, phone in her hand. She kissed my cheek and poured herself tea like nothing was wrong. I watched her stir the sugar, her ring glinting in the morning light. "Long night?" she asked almost casually. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. She didn't press. That told me everything. She already knew I hadn't slept. Maybe she'd been awake too, wondering if I'd figured it out. Then my son came in, hoodie pulled low, eyes red-shot, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. He didn't say good morning, just grabbed toast, muttered something about being late, and disappeared. The air he left behind was heavy. I had work, but I didn't go. Not that day. Instead, I sat in my car outside the pharmacy printed on the receipt. The sign buzzed faintly. The glass door smudged from customers' hands. I watched people go in and out, clutching bags, prescriptions, their little secrets. When I finally went inside, the clerk, a thin man with wire glasses, looked up from the register. "Can I help you?" I leaned on the counter, sliding the receipt across. I need to ask about this order. He frowned. Sir, we can't give out. I'm her husband, I interrupted. And I already know what she bought. I just need to know, was it her? Did she pick it up? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she came in last week, picked it up herself. My jaw clenched. That was all the confirmation I needed. I spent the next few days watching them more closely. Not confronting, not yet. That would have been too easy. Instead, I studied. At dinner, I let my wife pour my drink, and then I wouldn't touch it. I'd leave the glass half full, watching her eyes flick toward it just for a moment, then away. When my son said he was going to the library, I followed at a distance. He didn't go near the school. Instead, he walked to the park, sat on a bench, and pulled out his phone. I stood far enough that he couldn't see me, but close enough to notice how animated he was, how often he looked over his shoulder. Who was he talking to? I had to know. That night, I dug an old baby monitor out of the attic. 2 pieces, 1 transmitter, 1 receiver. When my wife and son were out, I slid the transmitter behind a stack of books on his shelf, angled perfectly toward the bed. The receiver went under my own, and so began the listening. The first 2 nights were nothing, just silence, the occasional creak of his mattress, the sound of his breathing. But on the 3rd night, just after midnight, I heard it. His voice low, careful, but clear through the static. I've got it, he whispered. A pause, then again louder. I said, I've got it. He doesn't know. My chest tightened. He was talking to someone in that room. I listened harder, waiting for another voice, but none came. Only his. I'll do it soon. She said it's better if he doesn't see it coming. My hand went cold around the receiver. She said, there it was again. Proof. He wasn't just keeping secrets. He was following orders from her, from my wife. I didn't sleep at all after that. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. The receiver still buzzing faintly on the nightstand. They thought they were pulling strings in the dark. But I wasn't the same man they remembered. I wasn't blind anymore. And when the time was right, I'd show them what betrayal really costs. By the 4th night, the baby monitor had become part of me. I would lie awake in the dark, the faint static whispering in my ear like a second heartbeat. My wife would be asleep beside me, or at least pretending to be. But I didn't trust the rhythm of her breath anymore. Everything about her felt staged, rehearsed, like she was performing for an audience only she could see. And my son spoke like an actor too. Every midnight whisper into the silence. Every muttered promise felt scripted, rehearsed. I could almost picture her words in his mouth, like she'd planted them there. He won't see it coming soon. She said it's the only way. By now, I was done guessing, done wondering if maybe I was overthinking. The only way forward was through proof, tangible, undeniable proof. So, while they were both gone the next afternoon, I went back into his room. The box was still there. This time I didn't hesitate. I cracked it open and pulled the notebook free. My hands shook as I flipped past the angry drawings and jagged scrolls I'd already seen, deeper into the middle, where the pages grew darker, heavier with ink. And then I stopped. A page stared back at me, written in block letters so deep, they'd nearly torn through the paper. The night of... My mouth grew dry. Beneath it, instructions, bullet points written in his hand, but echoing her voice. Wait until he's asleep. Crush the pills. Mix into his drink. Don't let him wake up. Don't hesitate. She'll handle the rest. I sank onto the edge of his bed, the notebook trembling in my grip. My own son, my blood, was plotting my death. And my wife was leading him. I don't remember leaving the room. Don't remember putting the box back or shutting the door. I just remember standing at the kitchen counter, with the notebook still in my hands, staring at the words until they blurred into black smears. That's when I heard her voice behind me. What are you doing? I spun too fast. She was there in the doorway, grocery bags in her arms, eyes narrowed just slightly. Just enough for me to see the calculation behind them. Nothing, I said, shoving the notebook under a pile of mail. Her eyes flicked to the mail, then back to me. For a moment, I thought she'd press. Thought she'd reach for it, but she didn't. She just smiled, small, sharp, knowing. I'll start dinner, she said softly, and she walked away. That night I didn't eat. I pushed the food around my plate, pretending. My son ate in silence, avoiding my eyes. My wife poured me wine, set the glass by my hand, and I didn't touch it. I caught her watching me, not directly. She was too careful for that. But in the reflections, the glint of the glass, the edge of the silverware, always watching. And that's when I understood. They weren't just planning it. They were already trying. Maybe it was the pills, maybe something else. But every glass she poured, every plate she served, every careful smile, they weren't acts of love. They were tests, trials. And they thought I was failing. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, while she shifted beside me, reaching for my hand. I didn't move, didn't give her the satisfaction, because in that moment my fear hardened into something else, resolve. They wanted me gone. They wanted to erase me from my own life. Fine, but I wasn't going to be the victim in their little story. I was going to be the ending. The days that followed were a delicate balance of appearances. I smiled at my wife at the table, poured my son's cereal, laughed at their jokes. All the while, my mind moved faster than they could imagine. Plotting, testing, calculating. They believed they were in control. But control is a fragile thing in a house built on lies. I started with small tests. One evening, I left a half-empty glass of wine on the counter, careful to keep my hands steady, my expression neutral. My wife walked past, glanced at it, and picked it up. I watched her pour it down the sink without hesitation. Nothing, no hesitation, no doubt. Then I left a note on my son's desk, deliberately phrased to suggest I knew something. I know what you're planning. Don't forget who's watching. I didn't confront him, didn't speak a word about it. Just watched. That night, his movements changed. The whispers on the baby monitor were sharper, quieter, cautious. He lingered longer in his room, checking doors and windows, as if sensing a predator he couldn't see. Good. Let them think I was clueless. Let them tighten their grip on their plan. It only made them predictable. The next day I began documenting everything. Photographs of the pills, the receipts, the journal entries. I copied the notebook by hand, preserving every sinister detail. If they succeeded in one attempt to remove me, I'd have the proof to bring them down completely. I even recorded snippets of conversation, when they thought no one was listening. The house became a network of traps and cameras hidden in plain sight. And then came the first real opportunity. I left the house early, pretending to go to work. In reality, I circled the block, listening to the monitor, keeping track of their movements. My son left the house mid-morning, phone clutched in hand, disappearing down the street. My wife lingered, waiting. I watched her hands tremble slightly as she poured coffee, careful not to spill a drop. She was acting too careful, too controlled. I smiled. The first threads were loose. That evening I staged another small test. I cooked dinner, deliberately oversalting the food. My wife tasted it, frowned slightly, and replaced the salt shaker with care. My son dug in, pretending to enjoy it. I noticed, though, the fleeting glance between them. Almost imperceptible, but there. The silent conversation. The acknowledgement that I hadn't yet been caught. Perfect. I was no longer simply observing. I was guiding them, nudging them into revealing themselves more fully. Every glance, every whisper, every careful smile was evidence I could gather. Every misstep they made strengthened my hand. By the end of the week, I had enough to understand one thing clearly. They were confident, overconfident, and overconfidence is the most dangerous flaw of all. I lay in bed that night, notebook and baby monitor within reach. My wife reached for my hand again, warm, tender, trusting, or so she thought. I didn't move, not a muscle. They believed they were clever, but I was patient, calculated, waiting. Because revenge isn't about anger, it's about timing. And I had all the time in the world. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if it sensed what was coming. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks, patiently gathering evidence, observing, documenting every interaction, every whispered conversation, every slight glance between my wife and son. They thought I was oblivious. They thought they had time. They were wrong. It started with the monitor. My son crept into the kitchen at midnight, whispering to someone I couldn't see. Tonight he won't know. She said, "It's time." The words hit me like a hammer. Tonight. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and moved silently. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I had a plan, a simple, effective trap that would let them expose themselves without a word from me. I set the stage. I left the sleeping pills where they would expect them, within reach, clearly visible, waiting to be used. I poured a glass of water on the counter, just enough to draw attention, not enough to drink. Then I went back to the hallway, heart steady, mind razor sharp. Through the door crack, I watched. My son entered, cautious, checking the empty hall. My wife appeared behind him, soft-footed, almost ghost-like. She whispered something. He nodded, swallowing his fear. They didn't see me. They didn't hear me. Perfect. Then the first mistake. He reached for the pills, fingers shaking slightly. My wife leaned close, murmuring reassurance, and in that moment she brushed against his sleeve. He flinched, not in fear of me, but in anticipation of failure. I clicked the flashlight on suddenly, sharply. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the guilty faces of both conspirators. "You looking for something?" I asked, voice calm, controlled. They froze. For a heartbeat, I could see the panic in their eyes, the realization that I had known all along. And then came anger. My son's face twisted. "You don't understand." "I understand more than you'll ever know." My wife stepped forward, voice trembling with defiance. "You're overreacting. He's just a boy." "A boy," I repeated. "A boy who's willing to betray his father, who plans my death with the guidance of his mother. That's not a boy, that's a threat. And threats," my voice dropped, "are dealt with. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the light, every shallow breath seemed amplified. I let them stew in fear for a few moments, watching their expressions, seeing the cracks. And then I added another layer to the trap. I slid the notebook from under the pile of mail and placed it on the counter. Pages splayed, the jagged writing exposed. I didn't touch them, didn't point. I just let it sit there like an accusation carved in ink. My son's hand twitched toward it. My wife's eyes widened. They realized the extent of their exposure all at once. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked softly. The silence that followed was deafening. They couldn't speak. Words had failed them. Fear had taken its place. And that finally was when I allowed myself a small smile, because now the game had begun. They had made their first mistake, and every mistake from here on would be their undoing. By the time the night ended, I had shifted completely. I wasn't a father anymore, not in that moment. I was the executioner of their deceit. Every whisper, every plan, every lie they had built against me would now be their trap, and the reckoning was only beginning. I had thought I understood the depth of their deceit. I had thought the journal, the pills, the whispered plans were the worst of it. I was wrong. That night after the confrontation, I waited until both of them were asleep, or so they thought. I couldn't risk another misstep. I couldn't let their paranoia tip them off to what I had planned. I went back to his room. The box, the notebook, the scattered notes. I had already memorized them, cataloged them in my mind. But there was something I hadn't considered. The digital trail. His laptop sat on the desk, screen dark. I picked it up carefully, fingers gliding over the keys, listening for the slightest noise from the house. Passwords were easy. He had left it unlocked in his rush to avoid me the night before, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. Emails, messages, and voice recordings. Everything meticulously labeled, time-stamped, and hidden in encrypted folders. Conversations between him and a stranger. References to me, discussions that made it clear. They weren't just planning minor mischief. This was larger than I had imagined. There were plans for financial sabotage. Bank accounts, insurance policies, even arrangements for my absence. Everything mapped out. Every move designed to leave me powerless. And my wife's fingerprints were everywhere. Correspondence signed with her initials, instructions, confirmations, codes. I sank into the chair, gripping the edge. My son, my own blood, was not only willing to betray me, he had been groomed, trained, coached. And my wife had orchestrated it all. I sat there staring at the screen, numb. The magnitude of their betrayal hit me harder than any punch could. Every lie, every hidden smile at the dinner table, every whispered reassurance. They had been performing a lie that would have ended me. And now I had proof. Solid, undeniable proof. I leaned back, letting the silence of the house press down on me. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. This was the moment where fear and anger fused into something else. Focus, revenge. I closed the laptop gently and returned it to its place, careful not to disturb anything. This wasn't the time for action yet. The time for action would come. But first they needed to feel safe again, to think their plan had survived. The next morning I acted as if nothing had changed. I poured my son's cereal, kissed my wife goodbye, and laughed at a joke she made about the bills. They noticed nothing. I could see the relief on their faces, the tiny breaths they released in the safety of their ignorance. Perfect. Because now I had the upper hand. I knew their schedules, their habits, their fears. I had recorded their conversations, documented every plan, every deceitful thought. I was no longer a passive observer. I was a predator circling its prey, and soon the trap would snap. That night, as they slept, I lay awake plotting. The pills would come later, the financial ruin later, the humiliation and more. Every act of betrayal had a price, and they were about to pay it. My son thought I didn't notice. My wife thought I hadn't seen the full scale. When I finally acted, there would be no forgiveness, only revenge. I had waited long enough. Weeks of silent observation, patience, and careful preparation had led to this moment. The house that once felt like a battlefield was now my chessboard. Every move I had watched, every whisper I had recorded, every glance I had memorized, all of it was fuel for what was about to happen. That night, I acted with cold precision. Step 1. Isolation. I made sure my wife and son would be alone in the house, using my usual excuse of a late work night. In reality, I had arranged for the neighbor to check in on me at my office, giving me freedom to move. Step 2. Exposure. I left subtle clues around the house, notes, slightly misplaced items, and even a single pill conspicuously left out of the hidden stash. Every detail was meant to make them think they were slipping, that I was closer to discovering everything. The trap. I watched from the shadows as my son, confident in his mother's reassurance, went to retrieve the pill, to mix it in my drink. My wife followed him, whispering instructions. And that's when I struck, not with violence, not yet, but with the psychological blow that would break their composure. "Looking for something?" My voice cut through the silence. Calm and controlled. They froze. My son dropped the pill, his eyes wide with panic. My wife's hand flew to her mouth. I stepped forward, holding the notebook, the receipts, the evidence I had collected. "I know everything, every plan, every lie, every single moment." "You thought I was blind." Shock turned to fear quickly. They tried to explain, to justify, to plead, but I didn't move. I let them twist in their own panic, the weight of their betrayal settling in. My son's face crumpled. My wife's knees nearly buckled. I laid out the evidence methodically. The pills, the journal, the emails, the recordings, every detail was undeniable. They had plotted my downfall down to the last second, and now it was all exposed. And then the final blow, the financial trap I had prepared weeks in advance. Bank accounts frozen, credit lines cut, their plans for inheritance and assets rendered useless. Every dollar they had schemed to control was gone, transferred or locked under my control. I watched them absorb it, felt the panic radiating from them like heat. You wanted to remove me from my own life, to take everything I built, to destroy me. And for what? They couldn't answer. The room felt small, suffocating. Their carefully constructed world crumbled in front of their eyes, and for the first time I allowed myself the satisfaction of seeing them truly afraid, not just of me, but of the consequences of their own betrayal. I left the house briefly, returning with a neighbor. I had called as a witness to their plotting. I revealed everything to them. The notes, the pills, the recordings. I let the knowledge settle. My wife and son were forced to confront the reality of what they had tried to do, and the ruin it had brought upon them. By the time the night ended, they were broken. Not physically, not yet, but broken in every way that mattered. Trust, power, and control. All taken from them by the one they had underestimated. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply knew. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from your own blood. And revenge is always sweetest when it is patient, deliberate, and absolute. The house was quiet, too quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a home at rest, but the hollow, tense quiet of a place stripped of pretense. My wife and son moved like ghosts, their eyes downcast. Words clipped, faces pale from the weight of what had happened. I watched them from across the room, feeling no joy, no relief, only the cold satisfaction of knowing they had been outmaneuvered, exposed, and undone by their own choices. Days passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The financial ruin I had engineered held firm. Friends and neighbors had heard whispers, too little, too late. The school administration had been made aware of my son's plotted schemes. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had planned. But the real triumph wasn't in money or exposure. It was in the control, the knowledge that those who had plotted against me now existed in a cage of their own making. Every glance they gave each other was fraught with fear. Every step they took in the house was measured. Every breath was a reminder. That betrayal carries a price. My wife finally approached me one evening, eyes red, voice trembling. "Why? Why didn't you just leave us?" she asked. I looked at her calmly, letting the truth sink in. "Because I wanted you to understand what it means to betray someone," I said. "You thought you could destroy me. You thought I wouldn't notice, and now you've seen the cost." Her silence was louder than any argument. My son sat across the room, head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. For the first time, he seemed smaller than he had ever been. A boy hiding behind the consequences of his own actions. And yet, even in victory, I felt something else. A shadow of loss, a flicker of sorrow. Revenge had its satisfaction, yes, but it could never undo the fractures in the family I had once loved. I had protected myself, yes, but at the cost of what could have been trust, warmth, unity. I had become both judge and executioner, and the quiet after the storm was heavier than any confrontation. Weeks later, life returned to a fragile routine. My wife and son spoke only when necessary, their rebellion replaced by obedience and fear. I moved through the house like a ghost among ghosts, watching, waiting, remembering. I had survived their betrayal. I had taken my revenge. But as I sat alone one night staring at the ceiling, I realized something chilling. The house was mine. Yes, the control was mine. The evidence and power were mine. But the family I had once known, trusting, innocent, whole, was gone. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the house was silent and my own heartbeat was loud in my ears, I wondered, had I truly won? Or had I simply become the very thing I had fought against? The house was silent, but it was no longer home. I walked its halls alone, the echoes of footsteps that weren't mine fading into memory. My wife and son existed, yes, but only as shadows of themselves, haunted, submissive, fearful. Every glance they exchanged carried the weight of exposure, every word measured, every breath carefully calculated. I had survived their betrayal. I had revealed their plans, dismantled their schemes, and exacted my revenge. I had proven that I was not blind, not weak, not to be underestimated. And yet the triumph was hollow. I sat in the living room one night, staring at the fading light through the curtains, and realized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself. In saving myself, I had lost them. Not just their trust, but the version of them I had once loved. The innocence, the laughter, the bond that made this house a home. I was the only one left standing, a father without a family. A man victorious, yes, but alone in the ruins of his own creation. Revenge had a cost, and in that quiet house, I understood the price fully. I hadn't just defeated betrayal. I had become it, and in the echo of their silence, I wondered, had I truly won or merely traded one kind of pain for another? The answer didn't matter, because in a house of shadows, all that remained was me. And the knowledge that betrayal once discovered cannot be undone. The house was mine, but I was no longer the man I had been.